The rhythmic click of expensive leather shoes echoed through the nearly empty corridors of Denver International Airport as Captain Marcus Hartwell made his way toward Gate 7. At 5:47 a.m., most of the world was still asleep, but Marcus had been awake since 4:15, his internal clock precision-tuned after 25 years of flying. His uniform was immaculate, navy blue with 4 gold stripes on each shoulder that caught the fluorescent lights, his silver wings polished to a mirror shine, and his cap positioned at exactly the regulation angle. Everything about Marcus Hartwell screamed authority, excellence, and unwavering confidence. He checked his phone again, scrolling through the flight details with practiced efficiency. Los Angeles, Cessna Citation X4 passengers, weather clear, should be routine. Then his eyes landed on the message that had arrived just 40 minutes ago, last-minute Copilot assignment, Jake Morrison, meet at Hangar 7. Marcus stopped walking, his jaw tightening. Jake Morrison. The name meant nothing to him, which was precisely the problem. In his quarter-century of flying, Marcus had cultivated a network of pilots he trusted, seasoned professionals who understood that aviation wasn't a game. He only flew with people whose reputations preceded them, whose logbooks told stories of thousands of hours in challenging conditions, whose names appeared in industry publications. Jake Morrison, nobody. A muscle in Marcus's temple began to throb, the familiar precursor to one of his legendary moods. His colleagues at the charter service knew to give Captain Hartwell a wide berth when that vein started pulsing. He'd worked too hard, survived too many close calls, and built too pristine a safety record to be paired with some unknown quantity at the last minute. The automatic doors whooshed open as Marcus approached Hangar 7, and the familiar scent of jet fuel and machinery oil hit his nostrils, a smell he'd loved since his first flight at 18. But this morning it brought no comfort. The massive hangar stretched before him, and there, gleaming under the industrial lights, sat the Citation X beautiful aircraft. Sleek, powerful, capable of Mach 0.935. A $23 million masterpiece of aviation engineering. And standing next to it was a kid. At least that's what Marcus's mind registered. The young man couldn't have been more than 30, maybe 32 at most. He wore faded jeans, for God's sake, not even proper flight pants, and a worn brown bomber jacket that looked like it came from a thrift store, scuffed white sneakers, a phone pressed to his ear, and most egregiously, a bright red Spider-Man backpack sitting at his feet. Marcus's hand tightened around the handle of his leather flight bag, his knuckles whitening. The young man was packing, his free hand gesturing animatedly as he talked. Even from 30 feet away, Marcus could hear fragments of the conversation. "I know, sweetie, I know. Daddy has to fly today, but I promise, I'll be home for your birthday party tomorrow. Yes, I'll bring the special cupcakes from that bakery you love." The man's voice cracked slightly. "Emma, baby, I haven't missed a birthday yet, have I? Well, okay, I missed that one, but remember, Daddy's plane had that problem, and yes, I felt terrible about it. But this time, nothing will stop me. I love you more than the whole sky. Put Grandma back on, okay?" Marcus felt his lip curl in disgust. A family man. A distracted pilot whose head was on school pickups and birthday parties instead of weight and balance calculations and weather briefings. Exactly the kind of liability that got people killed. The young man spotted Marcus and immediately brightened, waving enthusiastically with his free hand while still on the phone. Marcus didn't wave back. Instead, he pulled out his own phone and began typing furiously to his boss, Richard Chen, the operations manager. "Richard, who is Jake Morrison, and why am I just now being told I'm flying with him? This is unacceptable. I need a qualified co-pilot, not a last-minute substitute who looks like he wandered off a college campus." The reply came within seconds. "Marcus, we've been over this. Morrison is fully qualified. Stop being difficult and do your job." Marcus's face flushed red. Stop being difficult. He wasn't being difficult, he was being professional. There was a difference, even if Richard couldn't see it anymore. Across the hangar, the young man ended his call and started walking toward Marcus with a confident stride, hand extended, and a friendly smile on his face. Marcus noted with irritation that the smile reached the man's eyes, genuine warmth, the kind of openness that Marcus had long ago decided had no place in professional aviation. This wasn't summer camp. This was serious business. "Captain Hartwell," the young man called out, his voice carrying easily across the space. "I'm Jake Morrison. It's an honor to fly with you, sir. I've heard incredible things about your work with the diplomatic evacuations in 08. That emergency landing in Quito must have been." "How old are you?" Marcus interrupted, his voice cold as ice. Jake's smile faltered slightly, but he kept his hand extended. "I'm 32, sir. I've been flying since." 32, Marcus repeated, letting the words drip with disdain. He made no move to shake Jake's hand. "And how many hours do you have in a Citation X specifically?" "About 800 hours in type," Jake replied, slowly lowering his hand. "I've also got time in." "Do you have children, Mr. Morrison?" Marcus's tone made it clear this wasn't a friendly inquiry. Jake's expression shifted, something protective flickering across his features. "Yes, sir, a daughter, Emma, she's 6. Marcus made a show of checking his watch. "And I assume that's who you were making promises to on the phone just now. Birthday parties and cupcakes." A flash of something hurt, maybe, or anger crossed Jake's face, but his voice remained steady. "Yes, sir. My daughter's birthday is tomorrow. I'm planning." "Let me stop you right there," Marcus said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't fly with pilots who have their minds on birthday parties instead of airspeed and altitude. I've spent 25 years building a perfect safety record. I've landed planes in Category 4 hurricanes. I've handled double-engine failures over the Atlantic Ocean. I've evacuated diplomats from active war zones with surface-to-air missiles tracking us." He took a step closer to Jake, using his extra 3 inches of height to full advantage. "I've done all of this because I never allow distractions in my cockpit. And Mr. Morrison, you are a walking distraction. The sneakers, the cartoon backpack, the phone calls about cupcakes. You might as well be wearing a sign that says, 'My head isn't in the game.'" Jake's jaw tightened, and for a moment Marcus thought the younger man might actually push back. Instead, Jake took a slow breath and said, "Captain Hartwell, I understand you have concerns about safety. So do I. That's exactly why I take this job so seriously. My daughter is counting on me to come home tonight, which means I have every incentive to." "That's exactly my point." Marcus's voice rose, echoing through the hangar. "Your head is on going home to your kid, not on the flight itself. That divided attention is how accidents happen." "Mr. Hartwell," Jake began again, his voice still professional despite the clear hurt in his eyes, "if we could just review the flight plan together, I think you'd see that I've thoroughly—" "I'm not flying with you," Marcus said flatly. "It's nothing personal. It's about standards. It's about professionalism. It's about the fact that I refuse to compromise the safety of my passengers because dispatch made a last-minute scheduling error." He turned on his heel and walked toward the hangar office, leaving Jake standing alone next to the gleaming Citation X, hand still half raised in what would have been a handshake, the Spider-Man backpack a splash of color against the industrial gray floor. As Marcus pushed through the office door, he didn't see the way Jake's shoulders sagged, or the way the younger man's hand trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone to check on the departure time. He didn't see the flight coordinator, Sandra Chen, shake her head in weary frustration. All Marcus saw was another battle to fight, another stand to take for professional standards in an industry he believed was becoming too lax. He had no idea that in less than 3 hours, everything he thought he knew about professionalism, respect, and what it truly meant to be a captain would be turned completely upside down. The storm was just beginning. Sandra Chen had worked in aviation logistics for 17 years. She dealt with delayed flights, mechanical failures, weather emergencies, and even a pilot who showed up drunk. But in all those years, she'd never encountered anyone quite as stubborn as Captain Marcus Hartwell. Absolutely not. Marcus's voice boomed through the small hangar office, causing the coffee in Sandra's mug to ripple. This is non-negotiable, Sandra. I will not, I repeat, will not fly with some inexperienced kid who's more concerned with birthday parties than flight safety. Sandra set down her mug with deliberate care, fighting the urge to throw it at the wall, or at Marcus. Captain Hartwell, for the third time, Jake Morrison is fully qualified. He has his commercial license, multi-engine rating, type rating for the Citation X, and over 3,000 flight hours. That's more than some of your regular co-pilots. I don't care if he has 10,000 hours. Marcus slammed his hand on her desk, making the monitor shake. Numbers on a logbook don't tell me about judgment, about focus, about priorities. Did you see him out there? Jeans and sneakers, a Spider-Man backpack. He looks like he's heading to a comic book convention, not a professional charter flight. His clothing choices don't affect his ability to. Everything affects ability, Marcus cut her off, his face reddening. Discipline starts with appearance. If you can't be bothered to dress professionally, how can I trust you'll be professional in the air? And don't get me started on that phone call. Yes, sweetie, daddy promises. I'll bring the cupcakes. Is this a daycare center or a charter service? Sandra pinched the bridge of her nose, feeling a headache blooming behind her eyes. Marcus, you're being unreasonable. The man has a child. That doesn't make him incompetent, it makes him human. It makes him distracted. Marcus paced the small office like a caged lion. I've seen it 100 times. Pilots with kids, always rushing home, always thinking about school plays and soccer games instead of keeping their heads in the cockpit. That divided attention kills people, Sandra. Through the office window, Sandra could see Jake standing by the Citation X, phone to his ear again, probably explaining the delay to whoever was watching his daughter. Even from here, she could see the slump in his shoulders, the defeated set of his jaw. Her heart ached for him. Captain Hartwell, she said, her voice taking on a steely edge, I'm going to say this once. The pairing is non-negotiable. Jake Morrison is your co-pilot for this flight. You can accept it professionally or you can walk away. But if you walk, you're in breach of contract and Richard will hear about it. Marcus whirled on her, his eyes blazing. Then call Richard. Call him right now. He knows my standards. He knows my record. I've made this company millions over the years. I think I've earned the right to choose who I fly with. You've also cost us 3 flights in the past month because of your standards, Sandra shot back. Richard is already losing patience with you. The office door opened and both of them turned to see Jake standing in the doorway. Up close, Sandra could see the fine lines around his eyes, stress lines, grief lines. This was no carefree kid. This was a man who'd seen hardship. Ms. Chen, Jake said quietly, I can hear the shouting from the hangar. If Captain Hartwell is uncomfortable flying with me, I can make other arrangements. I don't want to cause problems. See, Marcus gestured at Jake triumphantly. Even he knows this isn't working. Let's just call the whole thing off and… We can't call it off, Sandra interrupted. We have 4 passengers who have paid premium rates for this flight. They're already on their way to the airport. For the first time, Marcus seemed to remember there were actual people depending on this flight. Well, then find another co-pilot. Call Jensen. Call Rodriguez. Hell, I'll fly solo if I have to. FAA regulations require 2 pilots for a Citation X, Jake said, his voice still calm despite the clear tension in his jaw. And Jensen is in Seattle. Rodriguez is on medical leave. There is no one else, Captain Hartwell. It's me, or the flight doesn't happen. Marcus turned to face Jake fully, and Sandra watched something ugly twist across the older pilot's features. It was the look of a man whose authority was being challenged, whose world wasn't bending to his will. "You want to know what I think, Morrison?" Marcus's voice dropped to something more dangerous than shouting. "I think you're in over your head. I think you talked your way into a job you're not qualified for. I think you probably know someone, pulled strings, called in favors, to get on this flight. And I think when something goes wrong at 40,000 feet, when we lose an engine or hit unexpected turbulence or face a real emergency, you're going to freeze. You're going to panic. And people are going to die because you were more worried about making it home for a birthday party than maintaining professional standards." The silence that followed was deafening. Sandra watched Jake's face cycle through emotions, hurt, anger, and finally, something like resignation. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Captain Hartwell, my wife died 2 years ago. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car head-on. She died instantly." Jake's hands clenched at his sides. "My 6-year-old daughter watched me fall apart. She watched me cry myself to sleep. She watched me struggle to get out of bed in the morning. And you want to know what she told me?" She said, "Daddy, Mommy loved watching you fly. She said you looked happiest in the sky. Don't stop flying, Daddy." Marcus's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been shame. "So yes," Jake continued, his voice stronger now, "I think about my daughter when I fly. I think about coming home to her. And that doesn't make me distracted, Captain. It makes me the most careful, the most focused, the most safety-conscious pilot in the sky, because I have someone depending on me, someone who's already lost one parent and can't afford to lose another." He took a step closer to Marcus, and Sandra was surprised to see that despite his casual clothes and youth, Jake carried himself with unmistakable authority. "I have prepared a thorough flight plan. I've checked the weather 3 times. I've reviewed every system on that aircraft. I've calculated weight and balance, fuel requirements, and alternate airports. I've done everything a professional pilot should do. And if that's not good enough for you, then fine, walk away. But don't you dare question my commitment to safety." For a moment, Sandra thought Marcus might actually back down. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes shifted away from Jake's steady gaze. But then his phone buzzed. A text from one of his pilot friends. "Heard you got stuck with a rookie. Stand your ground, Marcus. Don't let them lower the standards." Whatever softness had been forming in Marcus's expression vanished. His spine straightened, his jaw set, and he looked at Jake with renewed contempt. "Nice speech, Morrison, very touching, but emotion doesn't fly planes, skill does, and I'm not convinced you have it." He turned to Sandra. "I'm going to the lounge. I'll give you 2 hours to find a suitable co-pilot. If you can't, cancel the flight and refund the passengers. But I am not getting into that cockpit with him." Marcus strode out of the office, leaving Jake and Sandra staring after him. "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly. "I shouldn't have brought up Sarah. That was unprofessional." Sandra shook her head, fury and admiration warring in her chest. "No, Jake, that was honest, and he needed to hear it." She checked her watch. "But he's serious. He'll sit in that lounge for 2 hours, and if we don't produce a miracle, this flight won't happen." Through the office window, they could see a black SUV pulling up to the terminal entrance. The passengers were arriving. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from his daughter's grandmother. "Emma is so excited about you being home tomorrow. She's been talking about it all week. Don't let her down, Jake." Jake closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, Sandra saw a determination there that reminded her why she'd hired him in the first place. "Then we have 2 hours to change his mind," Jake said, "or to show him exactly who he's dealing with." The battle lines were drawn. The clock was ticking, and 4 innocent passengers were about to become collateral damage in a war of egos that neither pilot wanted, but only one could win. The airport lounge became Marcus Hartwell's fortress. He'd claimed a leather chair in the corner with a perfect view of Gate 7, positioned like a general surveying a battlefield. His laptop was open, his phone within reach, and his 3rd cup of black coffee sat steaming on the small table beside him. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another business traveler catching up on work. But Marcus wasn't working. He was making a point. Every 15 minutes, his phone buzzed with increasingly desperate messages from Sandra. 7:45 a.m. Marcus, the passengers have arrived. Please reconsider. 8:00 a.m. The bride is asking how much longer. Her reception starts at 2 p.m. 8:15 a.m. Marcus, this is getting serious. The executive has a meeting at noon that could save his company. Marcus deleted each message without responding. Let Sandra sweat. Let the passengers wait. Maybe next time, dispatch would think twice before assigning him inadequate crew members. But he couldn't quite delete the image of Jake Morrison's face when he'd mentioned his dead wife. That moment of raw pain quickly masked by professional composure. Marcus pushed the thought away. Sympathy was a luxury he couldn't afford. Aviation was about cold, hard facts, standards, safety, not feelings. Through the window, he could see Jake in the terminal, and what he witnessed over the next 90 minutes should have made him reconsider everything. The first passenger to approach Jake was a woman in her 70s, moving slowly with a portable oxygen tank. Mrs. Alina Richardson was traveling to Los Angeles to see her sister one final time before the cancer won. She'd paid extra for this charter because commercial airlines were too risky with her condition. "Young man," she asked Jake, her voice reedy and thin, "how much longer will we be delayed? My sister, she doesn't have much time." Marcus watched as Jake immediately pulled over a chair, helping Mrs. Richardson sit down. He knelt beside her, adjusting her oxygen line with practiced care. "Mrs. Richardson, I'm so sorry for this delay. I know every minute matters to you." Jake's voice was gentle but clear. "We're working to resolve a crew scheduling issue. I promise you, the moment we're cleared, I will personally make sure you're comfortable and will get you to your sister as quickly and safely as possible." "But when?" Her eyes were watery, desperate. "Will it be today?" "I'm doing everything in my power to make that happen," Jake said, and Marcus could hear the conviction in his voice. "May I get you some water, something to eat?" For the next 20 minutes, Jake sat with Mrs. Richardson, listening to stories about her sister, making calls to the LA hospital to confirm visiting hours, even arranging for a car service to pick her up at Van Nuys Airport. The elderly woman's anxiety visibly decreased, though the delay continued. At 8:30, a young couple arrived, the bride and groom, Melissa and David Chen. Melissa was already in tears, her wedding makeup running down her face. "This is a disaster," she sobbed. "Our reception starts in 5.5 hours. We have 150 people waiting for us. The caterer, the DJ, everyone is already setting up, and we're supposed to be doing our first look photos in 2 hours. David put his arm around her, but his own face was tight with stress. "We paid $12,000 for this charter specifically so we wouldn't have to deal with commercial airline delays. What the hell is going on?" Marcus watched Jake approach them, and he braced himself for the young pilot to make excuses, to shift blame. Instead, Jake did something unexpected. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen, first, congratulations on your wedding. I know this isn't how you plan to start your celebration." Jake pulled out his phone. "I can't change the delay, but I can help manage the fallout. Give me your wedding coordinator's number." For the next 15 minutes, Jake was on the phone, coordinating with the wedding planner to push back the photography schedule, adjust the reception timeline, and even suggesting they start cocktail hour early to keep guests entertained. He spoke with authority and creativity, finding solutions Marcus would never have considered because he'd never bothered to see passengers as people, just cargo to be transported. "We'll get you there," Jake promised the couple, "and I'll personally make sure we make up time in the air. The Citation X can cruise at Mach 0.92. I'll file for optimal routing and we'll have you on the ground with time to spare." Melissa's tears slowed. "You really think so?" "I guarantee it." Jake said with a confidence that made Marcus's jaw clench. The fourth passenger arrived at 9:00 a.m., and he was furious before he even reached the gate. Thomas Brennan, CEO of a struggling tech startup, stormed through the terminal like a hurricane. "Which one of you is responsible for this clusterfuck?" he shouted, his face purple with rage. "I have a meeting with investors at noon. They're putting in $10 million to save my company, and if I'm not there, they walk. Do you understand what that means? 50 employees lose their jobs, 50 families." Jake stepped forward, taking the full brunt of Brennan's rage without flinching. "Mr. Brennan, I understand the stakes. I truly do. I'm Captain Jake Morrison, and I'm doing everything possible." "Everything possible?" Brennan's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Everything possible would be having this plane in the air an hour ago. Everything possible would be competent crew who can actually do their jobs. I want answers, and I want them now, or I'm calling my lawyer and suing this entire operation into oblivion." Marcus felt a small smile tug at his lips. Finally, someone who understood that incompetence had consequences. Let the kid deal with a real passenger complaint. But Jake didn't crumble. He stood tall, maintained eye contact, and spoke with calm authority. "Mr. Brennan, you have every right to be angry. This delay is unacceptable and you deserve better. Here's what I can tell you. We're dealing with a crew issue that should be resolved within the hour. The moment it is, we'll board immediately. I've already filed a flight plan that will get us to Van Nuys in 2 hours and 43 minutes, accounting for winds. That puts you on the ground at 12:15, cutting it close but doable. Should be resolved, that's not good enough." "You're right," Jake agreed. "It's not, which is why I've also arranged a backup. If we can't depart within 30 minutes, I have a helicopter service on standby at Van Nuys that will get you from the airport to your meeting in downtown LA in under 15 minutes. I'll cover the cost personally." Brennan blinked, his rage deflating slightly. What? "Your meeting is too important," Jake said simply. "One way or another, you'll be there. I give you my word." Marcus's coffee had gone cold in his cup. He watched Jake coordinate with all 4 passengers, updating them every 15 minutes, bringing them coffee and snacks, making calls on their behalf, treating each person's crisis as if it were his own. The young pilot never blamed Marcus, never made excuses, never showed frustration. He just kept solving problems. At 9:45, Sandra appeared at Marcus's table, her expression harder than he'd ever seen it. "Marcus, that grandmother doesn't have much time. The bride's entire family is waiting in LA, and that CEO, he's about to lose everything if he doesn't make that meeting." She leaned close, her voice low and fierce. "Jake has offered to fly the aircraft solo to avoid further delays, but FAA regulations won't allow it. You are the only thing standing between 4 people and their lives. Is your ego really worth that?" Marcus looked past her to where Jake was crouched beside Mrs. Richardson again, adjusting her oxygen and making her laugh with some story. The Spider-Man backpack sat at his feet, probably packed with snacks and activities for his own daughter, a daughter who was waiting for him to come home for her birthday. His phone buzzed, another text from his pilot friend. "Don't cave, Marcus, hold the line." Marcus stared at those words. Hold the line. For what? For standards, for pride, for a reputation built on making other people feel small. He thought about his own kids, grown now, scattered across the country, who called maybe once a month if he was lucky. When had he last asked about their lives? When had he last sat with someone in pain and just listened? Marcus stood abruptly, grabbed his flight bag and walked toward the gate. Sandra's eyes widened in surprise. "I'll fly the damn plane," Marcus growled. "But I'm captain. I take the left seat. The kid follows my lead, no questions, no arguments, clear." Sandra nodded, relief flooding her face. Crystal clear. As Marcus walked past Jake, he didn't make eye contact. "Let's go, Morrison. We've wasted enough time." Jake's face showed nothing but professional composure as he stood. "Yes, sir. I'll begin the pre-flight check." Marcus was doing this because the passengers deserved better, not because he changed his mind about Jake Morrison. He definitely hadn't changed his mind. At least, that's what he told himself as they walked toward the gleaming Citation X, toward a flight that would change everything he thought he knew about what it meant to be a captain. The Citation X gleamed in the morning sun like a silver promise. Marcus climbed the air stairs with the confidence of a man who'd boarded 1,000 aircraft, his hand trailing along the fuselage with familiar appreciation. Beautiful machine. Whoever owned this bird had exquisite taste and deep pockets. The Citation X was the Ferrari of private jets. $23 million of cutting-edge engineering capable of speeds that made other business jets look like they were standing still. Inside, the cabin was even more impressive. Cream-colored leather seats, burled walnut accents, state-of-the-art entertainment systems at each position. The kind of luxury that made even Marcus, who'd flown Saudi princes and Silicon Valley billionaires, let out a low whistle of appreciation. But he didn't have time to admire the interior. He had a point to prove. Marcus moved straight to the cockpit, sliding into the left seat, the captain's seat with practiced ease. His hands moved automatically through the familiar dance of a pilot preparing for flight, adjusting the seat position, checking the rudder pedals, scanning the instrument panel. Everything was immaculate. Not a smudge on any screen, every switch in its proper position, the logbook sitting neatly in its holder. Jake boarded behind him, that ridiculous Spider-Man backpack still slung over his shoulder. He stowed it carefully in the small crew storage area before entering the cockpit. Marcus didn't look at him, already running through his mental checklist. "We're behind schedule because of this circus," Marcus said sharply, his voice taking on the clipped, authoritative tone he used with junior crew members. "So we're going to move fast. I'll handle the startup sequence. You'll monitor instruments and respond to my commands only. I don't need input, suggestions, or conversation. Your job is to follow my lead and keep your mouth shut unless I ask you a direct question. Are we clear?" "Actually, Mr. Hartwell," Jake began, his voice calm but firm. "I said, are we clear?" Marcus cut him off, still not looking up from the pre-flight checklist he was reviewing. "This is my cockpit now, my rules, my procedures. You wanted to fly today, fine, but you'll do it my way or not at all." There was a long pause. Marcus could feel Jake's presence in the right seat, could sense the younger man's tension. Good. Let him understand the hierarchy. Let him learn that in aviation there was no room for democracy or feelings. There was only rank, experience, and the chain of command. "Mr. Hartwell," Jake said quietly, "I need you to look at me." "I need you to start the instrument check," Marcus snapped back. "We've kept these passengers waiting long enough because of your—" "Marcus." The use of his first name made Marcus's head snap up, ready to deliver a blistering reprimand about proper cockpit protocol. But Jake wasn't looking at him. He was reaching into his flight bag, pulling out a leather folder. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded. "We don't have time for—" Jake opened the folder and slid a document across the center console. It was a standard aircraft registration form, the kind Marcus had seen 1,000 times. But something about Jake's expression, calm, sad, almost pitying, made Marcus actually look down at the paper. United States Department of Transportation. Federal Aviation Administration. Aircraft registration. Registration number, N72JD. Aircraft make, Cessna. Aircraft model, Citation X. Serial number, 750-421. And there in black and white. Registered owner, Jacob Ryan Morrison. Morrison Charter Services, LLC. Kalispell, Montana. Marcus's world tilted sideways. His eyes scanned the document frantically, looking for some mistake, some misunderstanding. The tail number matched. The serial number matched. The aircraft sitting around them, this beautiful, pristine, $23 million Citation X that he just claimed as his cockpit, belonged to the kid he'd spent 2 hours insulting. His gaze snapped up to Jake's face. The younger man's expression was neutral, professional, but there was something in his eyes. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a weary sadness, like he'd seen this movie before and knew exactly how it ended. But, Sandra said. Marcus's usually articulate voice had abandoned him entirely. His brain was frantically trying to reprocess the last 2 hours through this new, horrifying lens. The jeans and sneakers weren't unprofessional. They were what an owner wore when he was checking on his own aircraft. The Spider-Man backpack wasn't childish. It was a father balancing 2 jobs, probably filled with his daughter's things from a drop-off before the flight. The phone call about birthday parties wasn't distracted. It was a man who owned his own company managing his own schedule. And Marcus had treated him like an incompetent trainee. You own. Marcus couldn't complete a sentence. This aircraft, yes, Jake said quietly. I also own Morrison Charter Services, which contracted with your company to provide a co-pilot for this flight. You were hired to co-pilot my aircraft, Mr. Hartwell. Sandra tried to explain that during your first conversation, but you wouldn't listen. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Every arrogant statement he'd made came flooding back. I think you talked your way into a job you're not qualified for. You probably know someone, pulled strings, called in favors. This is my cockpit now, my rules. Oh God. Marcus's face burned crimson. His hands were shaking, actually shaking, as he handed the registration back to Jake. In 25 years of flying, he'd never felt so completely, utterly humiliated. He'd spent his career building a reputation as a professional, as a leader, as someone who commanded respect. And in 2 hours, he destroyed it all by judging a book by its cover. I didn't know, Marcus whispered, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew how pathetic they sounded. Sandra didn't tell me. She tried to, Jake interrupted gently. Multiple times, but you were too busy making assumptions to listen. Outside the cockpit, Marcus could hear the passengers beginning to board. Their voices carried up from the cabin, Mrs. Richardson's oxygen tank hissing softly, Melissa the bride thanking someone for helping with her dress, Thomas Brennan already on his phone trying to buy more time with his investors. 4 people whose lives had been delayed because of Marcus's ego. 4 people who were now boarding an aircraft where the captain and co-pilot were sitting in thick, suffocating tension. Jake turned in his seat, his hands moving to the startup checklist. Mr. Hartwell, we have passengers on board who have been waiting for over 2 hours. I need to know right now. Can you perform your duties as co-pilot on this flight, or do I need to find someone else? The question was phrased professionally, but Marcus heard the steel underneath it. Jake wasn't asking. He was giving Marcus one chance to salvage this situation. One opportunity to prove that beneath the arrogance and ego, there was still a competent pilot who could put passengers first. Marcus had 2 choices. He could get defensive, make excuses, storm off the aircraft and preserve whatever shreds of pride he had left. Or he could swallow the biggest, most bitter pill of his life and actually do his job. I can perform my duties, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. I need to hear you say it clearly, Jake pressed. Can you follow my commands as captain, respect my decisions, and work as part of my crew? Every word was like swallowing glass. Marcus Hartwell, legendary captain, being asked if he could follow orders from a 32-year-old in sneakers. The irony was almost too much to bear. But then he thought about Mrs. Richardson's oxygen tank, about Melissa's running makeup, about Thomas Brennan's 50 employees waiting to learn if they still had jobs. Yes, Marcus said, louder this time. I can do that, Captain Morrison. Jake studied him for a long moment, and Marcus forced himself to maintain eye contact, to show he meant it. Finally, Jake nodded. Then let's fly. Jake's hands moved across the panel with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "I'll handle the startup. I need you on the checklist, calling out items as I complete them. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," Marcus said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. As Jake began the startup sequence, Marcus watched with growing respect and growing shame. Every movement was precise. Every check was thorough. Every radio call was textbook perfect. This wasn't some lucky amateur who'd stumbled into owning an aircraft. This was a master craftsman at work. And Marcus had almost destroyed this flight before it even began, all because he couldn't see past his own prejudices. The engine spooled up with a familiar whine. Jake contacted ground control, his voice calm and professional. The passengers were settled. The aircraft was ready. But in the cockpit, nothing would ever be the same. The revelation had shattered Marcus's world, and now he had to figure out how to put the pieces back together, while sitting 3 feet away from the man he'd spent the morning insulting. "Denver ground, citation 72 Juliet Delta, ready to taxi," Jake's voice came through the headset. The flight that would change Marcus Hartwell's life was finally about to begin. The silence in the cockpit was suffocating. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he held the pre-flight checklist, his eyes tracking the words without really seeing them. Every few seconds, his gaze drifted to Jake's profile, the young man's face calm and focused as he worked through the startup sequence with methodical precision. 25 years of flying, and Marcus had never felt this small. "Battery master on," Jake announced, his voice steady and professional. Marcus forced himself to look down at the checklist. "Battery master verified," he responded, his voice sounding hollow in his own ears. "Standby power check." "Standby power verified." The ritual continued, but each response felt like another brick in the wall Marcus was building between himself and his own dignity. He was Captain Marcus Hartwell, the man who'd landed a crippled 737 in a thunderstorm, who'd evacuated diplomats from Kabul under hostile fire, who'd once been featured in Aviation Week and Space Technology as one of the most decorated charter pilots in North America. And he was currently serving as co-pilot to a man he'd called a distracted amateur less than 3 hours ago. The engines came to life with a smooth, powerful whine. Marcus had flown Citation XS before, but he'd never heard one sound quite this good. The harmonics were perfect, the spool-up smooth as silk. Jake maintained this aircraft the way some people maintained vintage Ferraris, with obsessive attention to detail. Of course he did, because Jake wasn't some careless kid. He was an owner-operator who'd built a business from nothing, who'd invested millions in this aircraft, who probably knew every rivet and wire in the airframe. And Marcus had judged him based on his sneakers. "Denver ground, citation 72 Juliet Delta at the FBO, ready to taxi with information Bravo." Jake's voice came through the radio, crisp and confident. "Citation 72 Juliet Delta, Denver ground, taxi runway 16R via Alpha, hold short of Bravo 7. Taxi 16R via Alpha, hold short Bravo 7, 72 Juliet Delta." The readback was flawless. Marcus found himself listening to Jake's radio work with the critical ear of someone who'd been doing this for decades, searching for any flaw, any hesitation, anything that would justify his earlier assessment. He found nothing. Jake's communications were better than most pilots with twice his experience. As they began to taxi, Marcus finally found his voice. The words came out rough, like he was dragging them over broken glass. "Jake, Captain Morrison, I need to say something." Jake's eyes remained forward, scanning the taxiway, but Marcus saw a slight tightening around his jaw. "We're moving an aircraft, Mr. Hartwell. Can it wait?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "It can't, because I need you to know before we take off, before we put these passengers' lives in our hands, I need you to know that I was completely, utterly wrong about you." Jake's hands remained steady on the tiller, guiding the Citation X smoothly along the taxiway. He didn't respond, just kept flying, waiting. Marcus pressed on, each word an effort. Everything I said back there, every assumption I made. It was unprofessional, unfair, and inexcusable. I judged you based on your age, your clothes, the fact that you're a father. His voice cracked slightly. I spent 2 hours treating you like an incompetent child when you were actually the most qualified person on this flight. And God, I'm so sorry. They reached the hold short line. Jake brought the aircraft to a smooth stop and finally turned to look at Marcus. His eyes were unreadable, not angry, not forgiving, just evaluating. Apology noted, Jake said quietly. Then he returned his attention to the checklist. Before takeoff checklist, please. The formality stung worse than any rebuke could have. Marcus deserved it, he knew that. But part of him, the prideful part that had driven his entire career, wanted Jake to accept the apology gracefully, to smooth over the awkwardness, to make this easier. Jake wasn't going to make it easier. Why should he? Flight controls checked, Marcus began, his voice hoarse. Check. Trim takeoff. Set. They ran through the entire checklist in clipped professional tones. No warmth, no camaraderie, just two pilots doing their jobs. But Marcus noticed something that made his chest tighten with a new kind of respect. Despite everything, the insults, the delays, the humiliation, Jake's focus never wavered. He wasn't flying angry. He wasn't flying to prove a point. He was flying with the steady, careful precision of someone who understood that 4 people in the cabin were depending on them to be perfect. Citation 72 Juliet Delta, Denver Tower, runway 16R, cleared for takeoff. Cleared for takeoff 16R 72 Juliet Delta, Jake acknowledged. He glanced at Marcus. You have the radios, I'll fly the departure, call out any deviations. Roger, Marcus responded, switching his focus to the instruments. Jake advanced the throttles smoothly, and the Citation X began its takeoff roll. Marcus watched the airspeed tape climb, 60 knots, 80, 100. Jake's right hand rested lightly on the throttles, his left on the yoke, his eyes scanning instruments and runway in a practiced rhythm that spoke of thousands of hours doing exactly this. V1, Marcus called out as they passed the decision speed. Jack. Rotate. Jake pulled back smoothly on the yoke, and the Citation X lifted into the Colorado sky as gracefully as a bird taking flight. The transition from ground to air was so smooth that Marcus barely felt it. He glanced back through the cockpit door and saw Mrs. Richardson smiling, her oxygen tank steady, not even a ripple in her water glass. That was the mark of an exceptional pilot, not just getting the aircraft in the air, but making it feel effortless for the passengers. Positive rate, Marcus announced. Gear up. Marcus raised the landing gear lever, feeling the satisfying thunk as the wheels retracted. They climbed through 1,000 feet, then 2,000, Denver falling away beneath them. The Rocky Mountains stretched to the west, their snow-capped peaks brilliant in the morning sun. Citation 72 Juliet Delta. Contact Denver departure on 124.3. Marcus keyed the mic. 124.3, 72 Juliet Delta, good day. As they switched frequencies and continued their climb, Marcus found himself actually watching Jake fly rather than just monitoring instruments. The younger man's technique was beautiful, smooth inputs, perfect pitch control, coordinated turns. He flew the way concert pianists played, making something incredibly complex look effortless. At 10,000 feet, Jake engaged the autopilot and finally allowed himself to relax slightly in his seat. He turned to Marcus, and this time his expression had softened just a fraction. Mr. Hartwell, I accepted your apology because I believe you meant it, but I need you to understand something. Jake's voice was quiet but firm. My wife's name was Sarah. She was a pediatric nurse. She sang off-key in the shower and made the world's worst coffee. She was brilliant and funny and kind, and when she died, I wanted to die too. Marcus felt his throat constrict. My daughter, Emma, kept me alive, Jake continued. She gave me a reason to get out of bed, to keep flying, to build something worth leaving behind if something happens to me. So when you mock me for being a father, when you suggested my daughter makes me less professional, he paused, choosing his words carefully. That wasn't just insulting my competence. That was insulting the only thing that matters to me in this world. Marcus started, but Jake held up a hand. I'm not telling you this to make you feel worse. I'm telling you because if we're going to work together, even just for this one flight, you need to understand that being a parent doesn't make me weaker. It makes me stronger, more careful, more committed to getting everyone home safely, because I know what it's like when someone doesn't come home. The words hung in the air between them. Marcus thought about his own children, Michael, a lawyer in Boston, Sarah, a teacher in Portland, David, working in finance in New York. When was the last time he'd called them just to talk? When was the last time he'd told them he was proud of them? He'd spent so much time building his reputation as a pilot that he'd forgotten to build relationships with the people who actually mattered. You're right, Marcus said quietly. About all of it. I've been flying for so long that I forgot why I started. I forgot that every passenger has a story, that every flight matters. I turned into exactly the kind of pilot I used to hate, the kind who cares more about being right than being good. Jake studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then maybe this flight is exactly what both of us needed. For the first time since boarding, Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. Not forgiveness, he didn't deserve that yet, but maybe, possibility. All right then, Captain Morrison, Marcus said, managing a small smile. Teach me something. And as the Citation X climbed toward cruising altitude with the Colorado Rockies falling away behind them, two pilots who started the day as adversaries began the slow, difficult work of becoming something more. At 41,000 feet, the world below looked like a child's toy set. The Citation X cut through the thin air at Mach 0.92, its engines purring with smooth efficiency. They'd been airborne for 40 minutes, and the tension in the cockpit had gradually evolved from suffocating to merely uncomfortable. Marcus had been watching Jake fly with the analytical eye of a flight examiner, searching for any flaw in technique, any shortcut in procedure. He'd found none. Every action was textbook perfect, yet somehow more than that, there was an artistry to the way Jake flew that reminded Marcus of why he'd fallen in love with aviation in the first place. The autopilot was handling most of the work now, keeping them on course toward Los Angeles. Through the cockpit door, Marcus could hear the passengers settling in, Mrs. Richardson's gentle snoring, the bride and groom murmuring to each other, Thomas Brennan still typing frantically on his laptop, trying to salvage his company from 41,000 feet. Jake was reviewing the weather ahead, checking winds, making minor adjustments to their route. Professional, competent, everything Marcus had accused him of not being. The silence finally became too much. Can I ask you something? Marcus ventured, keeping his voice low. Jake glanced over, eyebrows raised. Depends on the question. How does a 32-year-old end up owning a Citation X? Marcus paused. I'm not trying to be insulting. I'm genuinely curious. These aircraft cost more than most people make in a lifetime. For a moment, Jake didn't respond. His eyes stayed on the instruments, his expression unreadable. Marcus thought maybe he'd overstepped again, asked something too personal too soon. Then Jake's lips curved into a small, sad smile. You really want to hear the story? It's not short. We've got 2 hours of flying ahead of us, Marcus said, and I think I need to hear it. Jake adjusted the autopilot heading slightly, then leaned back in his seat, his eyes distant as if looking at something far beyond the windscreen. My grandfather, James Morrison, owned a small airstrip outside of Kalispell, Montana. Not an airport, just a strip. Single runway, barely 3,000 feet of cracked asphalt, a hangar that leaked when it rained, and an office that doubled as his bedroom when my grandmother kicked him out of the house. Marcus found himself smiling despite everything. He'd started it after World War II with money he saved from flying cargo planes in the Pacific. It was his dream, his own little piece of the sky. But by the time I came along, it was dying. Big airports had taken all the business. The hangar was falling apart. Grandpa was in debt up to his eyeballs. Jake's fingers absently traced the edge of the flight controls. I was 12 when my parents dropped me off there one summer. They were going through a divorce, and neither of them wanted to deal with an angry kid. So Grandpa got stuck with me. Best thing that ever happened to both of us. He taught you to fly, Marcus guessed. He taught me to live, Jake corrected gently. Grandpa had this saying, the sky doesn't care about your problems, it only cares if you're prepared. He put me to work that first summer washing planes, pumping fuel, changing oil, cleaning the bathroom. I hated every minute of it. But you came back. Every summer until I was 18, Jake confirmed. And somewhere along the way I fell in love, not with flying at first, with the planes themselves. The smell of aviation fuel, the sound of propellers cutting through morning air, the way sunlight looked on aluminum skin. Grandpa noticed. For my 14th birthday, he took me up in his old Cessna 152 and let me take the controls. Jake's eyes grew distant, lost in memory. I'll never forget that feeling, Marcus. The moment the plane responded to my touch, when I realized I could make this machine dance through the sky. It was like coming home to a place I'd never been. Marcus nodded, understanding completely. Every pilot remembered their first time at the controls, that magical moment when aluminum and fuel became an extension of yourself. Grandpa started teaching me everything, not just how to fly, but how to really know an aircraft, how to diagnose problems by sound, how to coax performance out of an engine. By 16, I had my private license. By 18, I had my commercial. I paid for every hour, every rating by working 3 jobs: night janitor at a hospital, fuel truck operator at the regional airport, and flight instructor on weekends. Your parents? Marcus asked. Jake's jaw tightened. Remarried to other people, new families, new kids. I was the reminder of their failure, so they were happy to let Grandpa raise me. Sent money occasionally, called on my birthday if they remembered. But Grandpa was my real father. The airstrip was my real home. He paused, checking their position on the GPS before continuing. When I was 23, Grandpa had a stroke. Massive. He survived, but he couldn't run the airstrip anymore. I came home from flight instructing in Seattle to find the bank was about to foreclose. The place had $200,000 in debt against maybe $50,000 in assets. Jesus, Marcus breathed. I could have let it go, Jake said quietly. Should have, probably, but that airstrip was Grandpa's dream, his legacy. I couldn't watch strangers tear it down for parts. He smiled grimly. So I made a desperate decision. I took out every loan I could, maxed out credit cards, and bought one used Cessna 182. Started Morrison Charter Services with literally one airplane and a prayer. That took guts. That took stupidity, Jake laughed. I worked 18-hour days, flying cargo runs, giving flight lessons, doing scenic tour, aerial photography, anything that would pay. Slept in the office. Ate ramen for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. For 2 years, I didn't buy a single piece of clothing, didn't go on a date, didn't have a life outside of flying and survival. Marcus watched Jake's profile, seeing the determination that must have driven that young pilot to succeed against impossible odds. But I had an idea. I'd been keeping detailed logs of every flight, fuel consumption, routing, weather, delays. I started noticing patterns, inefficiencies in how small charter services operated. So I started coding. Taught myself programming from YouTube videos at 2 a.m. Built a flight planning application that optimized routes and fuel costs specifically for small operations like mine. "The app you mentioned earlier," Marcus said. "FlightPath Pro," Jake confirmed. "I offered it free to other struggling charter services in Montana. Word spread. Within 6 months I had 200 users. Within a year, 2,000. A major aviation software company approached me with an acquisition offer." "How much?" Marcus asked, then immediately regretted it. "Sorry, that's none of my." $4.2 million, Jake said simply. "More money than Grandpa made in his entire life. I paid off every debt, renovated the airstrip, and bought a fleet of better aircraft. By then I was 26, and Morrison Charter Services was actually profitable." He fell silent, and Marcus saw the shift in his expression. The way joy drained away, replaced by something darker. "And then I met Sarah." Jake's voice changed when he said her name, becoming softer, more vulnerable. "She was a pediatric nurse at Kalispell Regional. I'd crashed. Well, technically it was a hard landing, not a crash, during a storm, and broke my wrist. She was working the ER when they brought me in. I was trying to joke with the doctor, saying I'd walked away so it was a good landing. She overheard and said, 'Walking away with a broken wrist isn't walking away, it's limping away with an inflated ego.'" Marcus found himself chuckling. "I was in love before the X-rays came back," Jake admitted. "Took me 6 months to convince her to go out with me. She thought I was reckless. Said pilots were adrenaline junkies with death wishes. But I wore her down. Showed her that I flew carefully, that I respected the sky." "She changed her mind," Marcus said softly. "She changed everything," Jake corrected. "Sarah made me see that success wasn't just about building a business, it was about building a life. We got married on the airstrip where I learned to fly, with Grandpa as my best man. Emma was born 2 years later, and the Citation X." He gestured at the cockpit around them. "This was our dream purchase. We'd worked toward it for 3 years. Sarah wanted me to have the best aircraft, the kind that would attract corporate clients, the kind that would take Morrison Charter Services to the next level. We signed the papers on a Tuesday, took delivery 3 weeks later. Sarah died that Friday." The cabin seemed to grow colder. Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Drunk driver," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ran a red light doing 70 in a 35 zone. T-boned Sarah's car on the driver's side. They said she died instantly. Didn't suffer, like that's supposed to make it better." "Jake," Marcus started, but there were no words adequate for that kind of loss. "Emma was 4. She asked me every day when Mommy was coming home. How do you explain death to a 4-year-old? How do you tell her that the person who sang her to sleep every night is never coming back?" Marcus thought of his own children, tried to imagine losing his wife when they were small, and couldn't even process it. "I almost sold this plane," Jake continued, running his hand along the panel. "Couldn't imagine flying it without Sarah beside me, but Emma said something that changed my mind. She said, 'Daddy, Mommy said you looked happiest in the sky. She wouldn't want you to be sad forever.'" He turned to Marcus, and his eyes were wet but clear. "So I kept flying, for Emma, for Sarah's memory, for Grandpa, who died 6 months after Sarah did, I think from heartbreak. And somewhere along the way, flying stopped being about escape and started being about legacy. Every flight, every passenger, every perfect landing, it's all proof that we survive, that we keep going even when it feels impossible." Marcus sat in silence, completely humbled. He'd spent the morning judging this man, this incredible human being who'd built something from nothing, who'd survived loss that would have destroyed most people, who showed up every day and gave his best despite carrying grief that must be crushing. "I'm so sorry," Marcus whispered, "for everything, for Sarah, for judging you, for being the kind of person who couldn't see past his own ego to recognize a better man." Jake nodded, accepting the apology. Then he checked their position and smiled slightly. "We're 20 minutes ahead of schedule. Want to see what this bird can really do." And as Jake Morrison showed Marcus Hartwell what a true master could do with a Citation X, Somewhere over the Nevada desert at 41,000 feet, two pilots became something more than colleagues. They became brothers in the sky. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly below them, a vast canvas of rust and gold painted by millions of years of wind and time. Marcus had just finished laughing at one of Jake's stories about Emma trying to help with a pre-flight inspection by drawing smiley faces on the wings with her finger when the cockpit erupted in sound. Beep, beep, beep. A master caution light blazed amber on the panel. Jake's demeanor shifted instantly from relaxed to razor-focused. His eyes scanned the instruments with the speed of someone who'd trained for this exact moment thousands of times. Marcus felt his own training kick in, adrenaline sharpening every sense. Hydraulic pressure, Jake said, his voice calm but clipped. Primary system, pressure dropping. Marcus's eyes found the gauge. The needle was falling 2,800 psi, 2,600, 2,400. Rate of descent, Marcus asked, already knowing they needed to get this aircraft on the ground. Too fast to be a slow leak. We've got a line failure or pump issue. Jake's hands moved across the panel with practiced precision, switching to backup hydraulics. He flipped the backup system switch. For a moment the pressure stabilized at 2,000 psi. Then it began fluctuating 2,200, 1,800, 2,300, 1,600. Backup system operational but unstable, Jake announced. Marcus, I need you on the emergency checklist, Section 4B hydraulic system failure. This was it, the moment that would define whether Marcus had truly changed or whether his ego would resurface under pressure. In the old Marcus's world, he would have second-guessed every decision, questioned Jake's authority, maybe even tried to take control. The new Marcus, the one who'd spent the last hour listening to a story of resilience and loss that put his own problems in perspective, reached for the quick reference handbook without hesitation. Section 4B, hydraulic system failure, Marcus read, his voice steady and professional. Step 1, verify backup system engaged. Verified. Step 2, reduce airspeed to minimize hydraulic demand. Reducing to 250 knots. Jake's hands moved smoothly, pulling back the throttles, the Citation X's speed bleeding off gradually. Step 3, prepare for manual reversion of flight controls if necessary. Understood. Marcus, I need you to contact ATC. We need priority landing at the nearest suitable airport. Marcus keyed the mic without hesitation. Los Angeles Center, Citation 72 Juliet Delta, declaring an emergency. We have a hydraulic system failure. Backup system operational but fluctuating. Request vectors to nearest suitable airport for immediate landing. The controller's voice came back instantly, professional but concerned. Citation 72 Juliet Delta, roger your emergency. Nearest suitable airport is Las Vegas McCarran, bearing 45, distance 87 miles. Vector heading 50, descend and maintain flight level 280. Heading 50, descending to flight level 280, 72 Juliet Delta. Marcus glanced at Jake. Vegas in 87 miles. Too far, Jake said, his eyes scanning the instruments. With these fluctuations, we might not have hydraulics by then. What else do we have? Marcus was already looking at the approach plate database. Henderson Executive, 72 miles, bearing 42. Runway 17L35R, 9,000 feet. No emergency equipment on field but close to Vegas fire. That's our target. Jake adjusted their heading. ATC 72 Juliet Delta requesting Henderson Executive instead of McCarran. We need the shorter distance. Roger, 72 Juliet Delta, Henderson Executive. Descend pilot's discretion. Vector direct Henderson, advise souls on board and fuel. Direct Henderson, 6 souls, 2 hours fuel, 72 Juliet Delta. Marcus did the mental math. 6 souls included both pilots and 4 passengers. 4 people whose lives depended on them working together perfectly for the next 15 minutes. In the cabin, he could hear the change in engine tone, feel the descent beginning. The passengers would know something was wrong. Someone needed to manage that. The old Marcus would have stayed glued to his seat, considering passenger management the captain's job. But Marcus wasn't that person anymore. "Jake," he said, already unbuckling his harness, "I'm going to brief the passengers. You focus on flying." Jake's eyes flicked to him, surprise and gratitude mixing in his expression. "Keep it calm. Don't sugarcoat, but don't panic them." "Trust me," Marcus said and meant it. He moved into the cabin, pulling on his captain's hat, a small gesture of authority that would help keep everyone calm. 4 pairs of eyes turned to him immediately. Mrs. Richardson clutched her oxygen tank. Melissa grabbed her new husband's hand. Thomas Brennan looked up from his laptop, his face already pale. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice warm and steady, the voice of a man who'd flown through hurricanes and lived to tell the tale. "I'm Captain Marcus Hartwell. We're experiencing a technical issue with our hydraulic system. Nothing catastrophic, but we're going to land in Henderson, Nevada, as a precaution instead of continuing to Los Angeles." "Are we going to crash?" Melissa asked, her voice small and frightened. Marcus crouched beside her seat, making eye contact. "No, Captain Morrison is one of the finest pilots I've ever flown with, and I've flown with hundreds. We have backup systems operational. We're going to land this aircraft safely, but I need you all to listen carefully to my instructions." He walked them through the emergency landing procedure: seatbacks upright, tray tables stowed, loose items secured, how to brace for impact if necessary. He checked Mrs. Richardson's oxygen levels personally, making sure her tank was secured. He helped Melissa remove her veil so it wouldn't obstruct her vision. He took Thomas Brennan's laptop and stowed it properly. "Captain Hartwell," Mrs. Richardson said, her frail hand reaching for his, "I trust you boys. My husband was a pilot in Korea. I know you'll get us down safe." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, ma'am, I promise." When he returned to the cockpit, Jake was in the zone. His hands rested lightly on the controls, his eyes scanning instruments and horizon in a rhythm perfected over thousands of hours. The hydraulic pressure was still fluctuating, but he was compensating beautifully, using throttle and trim to maintain smooth flight. "Passengers are secured and briefed," Marcus reported, strapping back in. "They're scared but calm. How are we looking?" "Hydraulic pressure is dropping overall. We're down to 1400 psi average with fluctuations between 1000 and 1800. I can work with that, but it's going to be tight." Jake's voice remained steady, but Marcus could see the tension in his jaw. "I need you calling out altitudes and airspeeds. My full attention needs to be on flying." "You've got it." They broke through 20,000 feet. Henderson Executive appeared on the GPS, 18 miles ahead. 72 Juliet Delta, Henderson Tower, you're cleared to land runway 35R, winds 320 at 8. Emergency equipment is standing by. Cleared to land 35R, 72 Juliet Delta. 15 miles, Marcus called. Altitude 12,000, descending 2,000 per minute. "Gear down," Jake commanded. Marcus dropped the landing gear lever. 3 green lights illuminated: nose, left main, right main. 3 green, gear down and locked. "Flaps 10. Marcus set the flaps. The Citation X's nose pitched slightly as the aerodynamics changed. 10 miles, 8,000 feet on glide path. The hydraulic pressure dropped to 900 psi and held there, trembling like a frightened animal. Jake's inputs became more pronounced. He was manually compensating for reduced control authority, using muscle and experience where hydraulics would normally provide effortless precision. 5 miles, 5,000 feet, airspeed 180. Flaps 20. The aircraft shuddered slightly as the flaps extended. Jake's right hand tensed on the throttles, his left making constant tiny adjustments to the yoke. 3 miles, 3,000 feet on profile. Below them, Marcus could see Henderson Executive, the long gray runway stretching across the desert, emergency vehicles positioned along the taxiway, their lights flashing red and white. 2 miles, 1,500 feet, threshold in sight. Full flaps. The nose pitched down as the flaps extended fully. Jake countered with back pressure, his movements smooth despite the compromised controls. The Citation X descended toward the runway like a wounded bird coming home to roost. 1 mile, 500 feet, airspeed 145 on target. Jake said nothing, every ounce of his concentration focused on the approaching runway. Marcus watched the altimeter unwind, 400 feet, 300, 200. 100 feet, sync rate 500 feet per minute, airspeed 135. 50 feet. Jake's hand feathered the throttles, bleeding off the last of their airspeed. The runway rushed up to meet them. 30 feet, 2010. The main wheels kissed the runway so gently that Marcus barely felt it. A perfect touchdown despite flying with compromised hydraulics, despite the pressure, despite everything. Thrust reversers, Jake commanded. Marcus pulled the levers. The engines roared, slowing them down. Jake stood on the brakes, harder than normal without full hydraulic assist, and the Citation X decelerated rapidly. 60 knots, 40-20. They came to a complete stop, with 3,000 feet of runway remaining. For a moment, neither pilot spoke. Then Jake's hands began to shake, the adrenaline finally catching up to him. Marcus reached over and gripped Jake's shoulder firmly. "That was textbook perfect, Captain. You just saved everyone on this aircraft." Jake let out a shaky breath. "We saved them together." From the cabin came the sound of applause. 4 passengers who didn't fully understand how close they'd come to disaster, but who recognized skill when they experienced it. Marcus keyed the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Henderson, Nevada. On behalf of Captain Morrison and myself, thank you for flying Morrison Charter Services, and thank you for your trust." As emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft and Jake began the shutdown checklist, Marcus realized something profound. He just experienced the best flight of his career. Not because of the emergency, but because for the first time in 25 years, he'd been part of a real team, 3 weeks. That's how long it took for Marcus Hartwell's entire life to fall apart, or maybe to finally come together. The Henderson emergency landing made regional news. "Skilled pilots save passengers in dramatic landing," read the headline in the Las Vegas Review-Journal. There was even cell phone footage from a witness showing the Citation X touching down smoothly while emergency vehicles raced alongside. Jake and Marcus spent 4 hours in Henderson that day, dealing with FAA inspectors, arranging passenger transportation to Los Angeles. Jake personally paid for a charter helicopter to get Thomas Brennan to his meeting on time, and overseeing the aircraft inspection. The hydraulic line had fractured, a manufacturing defect that even the most careful maintenance couldn't have caught. "You saved my company," Thomas Brennan had said, shaking both their hands before boarding the helicopter. "I'll never forget this." Mrs. Richardson had hugged Jake tightly. "Your wife would be so proud of the man you've become," she whispered. Melissa and David had their first dance as husband and wife that evening in Los Angeles, only 2 hours late, with a story about their wedding day that no one else could match. But it was what happened after the passengers left that changed everything. Jake and Marcus sat in the Henderson FBO, drinking terrible coffee while waiting for the maintenance crew to finish their inspection. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving both men exhausted and quiet. "I need to ask you something," Jake said suddenly, staring into his cup, "and I want you to think carefully before you answer." Marcus looked up, curious. How do you feel about your job right now? Not this flight, your actual job, the corporate charter service. Flying executives from city to city. The routine, the politics, Jake paused, searching for the word. The emptiness of it. The question hit Marcus like a physical blow because it was so precisely, painfully accurate. He thought about his typical day showing up, flying whatever route dispatch assigned, maintaining professional distance from passengers he barely saw as human, returning to an empty apartment, eating dinner alone, going to bed, and repeating the cycle. Honestly, Marcus said, I've been going through the motions for years, maybe a decade. I tell myself it's a good job, good pay, good benefits. But the truth is, I stopped loving it somewhere along the way. I stopped seeing the magic. Jake nodded slowly. I've been thinking about expanding Morrison Charter Services. Not just in Montana, I mean really expanding. Adding more aircraft, more routes, more pilots. Building something that prioritizes people over profit, that remembers why we fell in love with flying in the first place. He turned to face Marcus directly. I need someone with experience to help me do that. Someone who knows the corporate side, who can handle the big clients, who has the credentials and reputation to open doors. But more than that, I need someone who understands what we're actually selling, not just transportation but care, safety, trust. Marcus's heart began to beat faster. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, Jake corrected. Not equal ownership, it's still my company, but a real role, director of flight operations. You train new pilots, manage our growing fleet, handle corporate accounts. You'd have authority, respect, and the chance to build something meaningful instead of just logging hours. He paused, letting Marcus absorb this. But I need to be honest about what I can't offer. I can't match your current salary, at least not yet. You'd probably take a 30, maybe 40% pay cut initially. You'd have to relocate to Montana. And you'd be working with young pilots, diverse crews, people who don't fit the traditional mold. People like me. Jake's eyes held steady on Marcus's. So I'm not asking you to make a decision now. I'm asking you to think about it. Think about whether you want to spend the next 10 years doing what you've been doing, or whether you want to take a risk on something different, something that matters. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Jake held up a hand. 3 weeks, he said. Give it 3 weeks. Go back to your life, fly your normal routes, see how it feels, then call me. Marcus did exactly that. He returned to Denver, filed his incident report, and went back to work. But everything felt different now. The first flight back, he was paired with a Copilot he'd flown with dozens of times, a competent but uninspired pilot who treated passengers like cargo and flying like a paycheck. Marcus found himself irritated by every shortcut, every lack of engagement, every missed opportunity to make someone's day better. He called his daughter, Sarah, that evening. Really called her. Not just a quick checking in, but an actual conversation. They talked for 2 hours. She told him about her students, her struggles, her dreams. He told her about Jake, about the emergency landing, about realizing he'd spent so many years building a career that he'd forgotten to build relationships. Dad, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion, I don't think I've heard you sound this alive in 20 years. He called Michael and David too. Had real conversations, listened to their lives, apologized for being absent, for prioritizing work over family, for being the kind of father who showed up physically but never emotionally. His son David said something that haunted him. Dad, you were always Captain Hartwell. We just wanted you to be our dad. On the 15th day, Marcus showed up for a routine flight to Miami. As he walked through the terminal, he saw a young pilot, couldn't have been more than 25, struggling with a heavy flight bag while trying to calm a crying baby in a carrier strapped to his chest. The old Marcus would have walked past without a second glance. The new Marcus stopped. Need a hand? He asked. The young pilot looked up, surprised. Oh, Captain Hartwell, I'm sorry, she's teething and my wife had to work and daycare fell through and... It's okay, Marcus said gently, taking the flight bag. What's her name? Sophie, she's 8 months. Marcus looked at the baby, remembering his own children at that age, remembering all the moments he'd missed because he was chasing the next flight, the next destination, the next line in his logbook. She's beautiful, Marcus said. You're going to blink and she'll be graduating high school. Don't miss it like I did. The young pilot's eyes widened. Thank you, sir, that means a lot. As Marcus walked away, he pulled out his phone and called Jake. Morrison Charter Services, Jake answered. When do you need me to start? Marcus said without preamble. There was a pause, then he could hear the smile in Jake's voice. You're sure? I'm sure. I've spent 25 years being Captain Hartwell. It's time I learned how to be Marcus again. Time I learned what really matters. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the tarmac of Morrison Airfield in Kalispell, Montana, watching a young pilot, fresh out of flight school, nervous and eager, perform a pre-flight inspection on a Cessna 182. The kid had shown up in ripped jeans and a band t-shirt, and Marcus's first instinct had been to criticize. Instead, he'd introduced himself, shaken the kid's hand and said, "Tell me about your training. What got you interested in flying?" The transformation in the young pilot's face, from nervous to excited, reminded Marcus of why he'd made this choice. Morrison Charter Services had grown. They now had 5 aircraft, 12 pilots, and a reputation for treating both passengers and crew with exceptional care. Marcus had implemented training programs that emphasized not just technical skill but human connection. He'd recruited pilots who'd been overlooked by traditional services, single parents, older career changers, people who didn't fit the conventional mold but who had something more important: heart. A pickup truck pulled into the parking lot, and Jake climbed out, followed by a small blonde whirlwind in a purple dress. Uncle Marcus, Uncle Marcus. Emma Morrison, now 6.5, ran full speed toward him. Marcus caught her mid-leap, spinning her around. There's my favorite co-pilot. How was school? I got an A on my spelling test. And guess what? I told Miss Henderson that my Uncle Marcus used to be mean, but now he's nice, and she said people can change if they want to, and I said you changed because Daddy showed you how. Marcus laughed, his heart full in a way it hadn't been in decades. He'd become a fixture in Emma's life, attending soccer games, helping with homework, teaching her about airplanes, and being the fun uncle he'd never been with his own children, though he was working on rebuilding those relationships too. Jake walked over smiling. She's not wrong, you did change. No, Marcus said, setting Emma down and watching her run toward the hangar where her favorite plane was parked. You showed me what I'd lost. You reminded me why any of this matters. They stood together, watching Emma trace her small hand along the wing of the Cessna, the same way Jake had probably done at her age, the same way Marcus had done 40 years ago when he still remembered how to dream. I got a call today, Jake said, from Brennan, the executive from our emergency flight. He wants to contract us for all his company's executive travel, says he only trusts pilots who care enough to get it right. Marcus nodded. That's what we do now. We get it right. Not because we're chasing perfection, but because we actually care about the people we're flying. Emma came running back. Daddy, can we go flying, please? Uncle Marcus said he'd teach me about the instruments. Jake glanced at Marcus, who shrugged and smiled. They had nowhere else to be, no schedule to keep, no corporate masters to please. Just a beautiful Montana afternoon, a little girl who loved the sky and all the time in the world. Let's fly, Jake said. As the 3 of them walked toward the Cessna 182, a father, his daughter, and the man who'd learned that true captaincy wasn't about authority or ego, but about service and connection, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him here. He'd spent 25 years believing the left seat made him superior, but he'd learned something more important. The best seat isn't determined by position or rank. The best seat is anywhere you can see clearly, whether that's on the left, on the right, or on the ground watching the next generation prepare for flight. Jake helped Emma into the co-pilot seat, carefully adjusting the cushion so she could see over the panel. Marcus slid into the back, content to observe, to teach, to support. As the propeller began to turn and the little Cessna rolled toward the runway, Emma's laughter filled the cockpit. Pure joy, unfiltered wonder, the sound of a child discovering magic. "Uncle Marcus," Emma called back. "Yes, sweetheart. Daddy says you used to be the best pilot in the whole world. Is that true?" Marcus glanced at Jake, who was trying not to smile. "No, Emma," Marcus said honestly. "I used to think I was, but your daddy taught me something important. Being the best pilot isn't about how many hours you've flown or how perfect your landings are. It's about how many people you've helped get home safely, how many lives you've touched, how much you've cared." Emma thought about this seriously. "So Daddy's the best pilot?" "Your daddy," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "is the best man I know. And I'm grateful every day that he gave me a second chance to learn what that means." The Cessna lifted off the runway, climbing into the vast Montana sky. Below them, the airstrip where Jake's grandfather had once struggled to keep a dream alive now thrived with new life, new purpose, new stories. And somewhere in heaven, Marcus liked to think, Sarah Morrison and James Morrison were watching, proud of what their legacy had become. Not just an airfield or a business, but a family, a home in the sky for lost souls learning to fly again. The end.